Think about a recent conflict that you have, maybe a conflict with a coworker, a fellow classmate, a good friend, a romantic partner, a roommate, maybe even a family member. And what was it about that conflict that made it so frustrating? Did it escalate? Did it de-escalate very quickly? Did you find yourself saying things that you didn't mean, that you didn't intend to say, that maybe you even regretted later? Did you find yourself toward the end of the conflict feeling better as you reached resolution, or feeling worse? Conflict is a natural and inevitable part of our social world, so you can't avoid it. It's going to happen. Even when you're very passive and you try to withdraw, you still end up going through the emotional turmoil of a conflict. But how we manage that conflict is even more important than the fact that we're going through it. Now, I want to teach you about conflict itself, as well as ways that we can engage in conflict management. How do you know that you're in a conflict? What is the litmus test, so to speak, that lets you know, I'm in a conflict right now. This situation is undesirable because maybe they're calling me names, or maybe I'm disagreeing with them about some facts and it's escalating. Or maybe through the conflict you're producing something more positive. But usually we have pretty negative labels for conflict, and we could have more positive labels for conflict if we just knew how to go about it more effectively. Let's first all start by sharing some of what we know about conflict in terms of a definition that we can work with, as well as some types of conflict that are common. Putnam and Poole identified 3 I's of conflict, which make it really, I think, easy to memorize this definition of conflict. There's interdependence, incompatibility, and interaction. So, when you bring it together, you have conflict as a social interaction between 2 or more interdependent parties in which perceived incompatibilities are expressed. The interdependence between the parties basically means that those 2 people have to be interdependent. They have to have ongoing social interactions and depend upon one another in order for there truly to be a conflict. For example, if I have a different political view of someone across the world, I'm not interdependent with that person. I don't know them. So we might have incompatibilities. We may even interact on Facebook or something like that. But if I don't have an ongoing relationship with them, then what does it matter? Am I really in a conflict with them? Incompatibilities are going to be expressed. They can be incompatibilities related to facts, emotions, behaviors, and a variety of things. Now, there has to be an incompatibility for there to be a conflict. Otherwise, just because you have interaction and interdependence does not mean you have a conflict, right? You have to have the incompatibilities, and then there has to be an ongoing interaction between 2 or more interdependent parties. And that interaction is where the conflict is going to emerge, it's going to play out, and hopefully it'll be resolved, but not always. There are 5 types of conflict that are discussed. I have a problem with the 5 types of conflict in that I think that you can simultaneously experience multiple types of conflict, and so it's kind of difficult when you have to identify maybe like one type of conflict that is going on in the relationship at a time. And conflicts can be very complex and difficult to dissect. The first type of conflict that's described in your textbook is pseudo-conflict, and this is conflict that's really not conflict according to your textbook. And that people just think they're in conflict because of their perceptions. However, we know that our perception is our reality. That's what we react and act upon. And so therefore, if you perceive you're in a conflict, even if there's no real incompatibility, then you're going to interact still based on your perceptions. So it's very difficult, even in pseudo-conflicts, to say that there's not a conflict. Fact conflict is conflict over something that can be verified, can be looked up, that could be solved if you had the ability to look it up. A lot of conflict that I've experienced in the past related to fact conflict has been over what someone has said or not said. And either they said it or they didn't say it. I mean, there is a true or false related to it. However, I can't know that information in many cases because I don't carry a tape recorder around with me everywhere and record what everyone says to me. Also, there's value conflict. Value conflict surfaces lots of times in our intimate relationships that we have with other people. In our family relationships, romantic relationships, our very close friend networks. We experience value conflict, and because we have a tendency through what we label in social identity theory is identifying with people that we perceive to be like us, which is called homogeneity. And when we identify with people that we think are like us, then it can sometimes really upset us when we find out that there are incompatibilities, especially related to something that we hold as intrinsic and important and meaningful to us as our values. Then you have policy conflict. Policy conflict relates to conflict over the way things should be done or you think they should be done. So it's behavior oriented. We have policy conflict over something as silly as how to cook a turkey to as significant on a national level as, what should we do with Social Security? And then finally you have ego conflict, which is related to a stubbornness, to someone wanting to be right all the time and not willing to give in, and it's related to winning a fight, and they always want to win that fight. And as you can see, it's possible to experience multiple types of conflict because it may be that a fact conflict is spurred on by the fact that someone's ego involved in it. Or that it may be that a policy conflict becomes much more complex and intricate because there are values that are involved in it as well. So you can have an overlap between them. I have a little quick quiz for you to look at to determine which type of conflict is the primary type of conflict going on here, based on what is said. Edna and Clifford have been arguing back and forth. Clifford asks Edna if they can agree to disagree, but Edna thinks she's right and cannot let it go. Edna wants to win the argument. Obviously, this is ego. Zach and Ryan cannot seem to agree on the shortest route to get to Taco Bueno. In the middle of the conflict, Zach realizes that he and Ryan agree, but we're calling some streets by different names. When Zach and Ryan look up a map, they were able to resolve the conflict because they realized that they were talking about two different things. And this might be labeled as pseudo-conflict. So that gives you an idea of the different types of conflict that you may experience.